Of Elevate Your Grind, brought to you by the Cannabis Lab. I am your host, Todd Rosales, and as always, it is lovely to be here. We're getting towards the end of the year. I think I might still be full from Thanksgiving. I hope you guys all had a great Thanksgiving holiday. I'd love to get some feedback in the comment section on how cannabis was approached at your Thanksgiving table this year. Was it talked about openly? Did you have to go for a walk with your cousins? Were you able to say, hey, we're going to go smoke a joint before we all this food because it's that much better, right? I'd love to understand how everybody's integrating cannabis into their Thanksgiving. And don't worry, folks, we have the ability to do it again one more time before the end of the year when we get together for Christmas and Hanukkah or Kwanzaa or anything else that you celebrate. All right, folks, we're down here in South Florida, which means that most of you from the rest of the country are making your way towards us because our weather is exponentially nicer than yours. And on that note, we have a special guest here today that is going to be, not him, but his group is going to be hosting an amazing event here next week. I believe it's at the Loews Miami Beach, which is not a terrible place to be in the month of December. And I think he's going to correct me, so I'm going to invite him in. Please welcome Jeff Finkle from Arcview. Jeff,
nice. Yeah, I had to resist. It's thank you, Todd, by the way, but it's Loews Coral Gables.
Loews Coral Gables. Okay, I just assume everything's on Miami Beach because you know, whenever anybody from outside of Florida tells me it's in Miami, they only consider the beach, which Coral Gables is an absolutely beautiful part of Miami. The restaurants there are incredible, and that's where the Biltmore Hotel is as well, if anybody's into golf. So great location for it. I'm really excited, Jeff. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, it will be a pleasure to get you out of the gloomy New York City into the lovely Miami weather coming up next week. Jeff, you know, Arcview has been an institution, to me at least, in the cannabis space, right? It's been around for a very long time. It's been a trusted institution by so many that have gotten into the space, and it's launched so many amazing companies into cannabis. I think a lot of people who've come into this industry in the past couple of years are not as familiar with those of us that have a little bit more scars on our back, where when you started in cannabis 5 years ago, 6 years ago, like, you needed to get to an Arcview event. Like that was the Johnny Carson of the cannabis industry at the time. So I'd love for you to give the folks the folks that are newer to the industry, an overview of Arcview, its roots, and where you are today. Because I know there's an entire ecosystem that you guys offer.
Yeah, you know, we've evolved a lot, but you're right. There's a rich history. Arcview was actually started about 12 years ago. By Troy Dayton and Steve DeAngelo. You know, Steve is, you know, largely thought of to be the father of the modern cannabis movement. Mm-hmm. The guy in the pork pie hat and the braids, for those of your listeners that don't know. And, you know, Troy and Steve really founded it through the lens of advocacy and, you know, freeing the plant. But I think they quickly realized that in order to deliver on that, they had to really nurture the economic growth of the industry. Yeah. So what did they start to do? They created events where investors, entrepreneurs, and operators could convene, meet each other, and fund companies. So they hosted maybe 4 or 5 events a year, I think from 2010 to 2019. And they created an investor network, a membership that you would join and be able to come to these events and see these companies. And that's what they did basically for 9 years. And the impact to the industry was pretty great. Through that period of time, I'd say some $300 million found its way to over 250 companies facilitated at Arcview events. The problem is that Arcview didn't benefit economically to the extent that they were a service to the industry. So 2019, another South Florida fund on Treasure Fit Capital came in, took governance and economic control of the company. And the idea is to take that great brand, to take all of the financings that we were nurturing and participate in the transaction. So how do we do that? Created a broker-dealer in partnership with a couple of ex-FINRA guys that does investment banking. That's called Arcview Capital. We created a venture group called Arcview Ventures, and within that, we're investing out of 2 funds. We created a consulting company called Arcview Management Consulting that does license pursuit, brand expansion, and designs SOPs for operators. And we recently took the event business and put it in a joint venture with a private equity funded event producer, where they produce our investor conferences under our brand, but it is now a separate entity. And all of that feeds up to the holding company, which is the Arcview Group. So if you sort of to summarize, we're a holding company with interests in a broker-dealer investment bank, a venture group, a consulting group, and an event producer.
So realistically, for someone who's new to the cannabis industry that's looking to get started or has a great idea or even has gotten started a little bit, Arcview is almost like a one-stop shop for them to get some of the expertise they need. If you have a master cultivator that is looking, that has a brand that maybe needs some work and attention, obviously they need capital. You know, to me, you look back at what Troy and Steve did back in the day, and by no means would I think anybody look at those two, especially when they first started, and call them suits or chads or anything along those lines, right? And I think when you look at, there's a huge disconnect in this industry still that I'd love to fight the stigma of both sides really needing each other, the suits and the OGs and everything else like that. But you look at Troy and Steve, especially Steve, an OG who came in and realized that, hey, if this is going to be a legal industry, if people are going to be successful, if we're going to get the attention of the government to actually fully legalize this because we believe it needs to be so, then we have to structure it and package it like something they're used to. And that's a traditional business. That's something that has accounting and HR and pays taxes and, you know, is structured in a way where it can grow and people can invest in it. And that's where I see the true benefit of Arcview, along with, you know, beyond just the initial funding that you provide to people, but the long-term services, considering if you look at the alumni that have come through the Arcview Group, you know, you have some of the best and brightest minds, at least on the business side, in the industry as part of your network. Why wouldn't somebody want access to that to figure out how they package it to be something that people are familiar with so they can also be successful? And to me, that's the ultimate coming together of the suits and the OGs or whatever you want to call them. And you guys are providing that.
Yeah, and that community has only gotten more diverse. You're right, Troy and Steve were anything but suits. And it was important to legitimize investing in cannabis by encouraging companies to look like real companies. And so we certainly did that. But, you know, I think too, you know, we just completed our first post-COVID investor conference in New York in October. It was attended by about 400 people. And it was hugely diverse. I mean, the earlier Arcview events, Todd, I mean, you're right, but there were still a lot of rich white guys there on the investor side. This event was uniquely diverse. We had legacy growers, we had minorities who were investing, minorities who were starting businesses, and it was so noticeable. In fact, if any of your listeners, you know, are interested and they want to contact me, I'll send them a little video clip of that, and you can really feel the community and feel the diversity.
No, and I'm excited about that. And like I said, I think you guys have been a cornerstone of advancing this industry and continue to do so, right? I look at the infrastructure that you're putting together and the expertise that you're bringing to the table, partnering with a broker dealer, partnering with an events firm, bringing in people who do this well to help legitimize the industry. We need more of that, right? And these are great events to go to. So the next one is coming up. Was it next week? Like you said, it's at the Loews Coral Gables, which is a beautiful hotel in a beautiful space. Can you give us a little preview as to what people can expect at that event? I know you and I were just talking briefly before this, and you said you've got some great content lined up.
Yeah, so it'll be a mix of, you know, let me start by telling you what the goals are, and then I'll tell you what people can actually expect.
Absolutely.
Coming back to live events after a 2.5-year hiatus, we had to really examine what the goals were and how we were going to handle this reemergence. We came up with 4 of them, right? The first is to honor the existing legacy Arcview community, but extend it, because the industry is really very different than it was in 2009. The Canna Curious has mostly doubled. The emergence of the industry in the Midwest and the Northeast, which we're celebrating today, really didn't exist before. So we wanted to honor that, but welcome new people into that special community. The second thing we wanted to do is make sure we were delivering nuanced content, right? I mean, you can go to a lot of conferences and you'll hear, you know, what are MSOs doing? There's a lot of what I would call 101 content. We wanted our content to be meaningful, interesting, and really not rote and obvious. And the next goal was to again, true to our roots, is to be about investors, operators, and entrepreneurs, both big cannabis and emerging cannabis. We want young entrepreneurs to be able to ask questions of investors and get to learn how they think, how they vet deals, what's important to them. And then lastly, and this is, again, right to our roots, we wanted to support diversity and justice to those wrongly affected by the war on drugs and create a place for them. And I think that was represented in our panelists and content in New York and again in Miami. Anyway, specifically, we are going to have representatives on the regulatory side at the national level. We're going to have Toy Hutchinson from the Marijuana Policy Project drill down into what's going on in the southeast and southern states, because we do want a local flair to this. And we've got, for our and a lot of other stuff. So we have Kim Rivers and Shonda Messias on stage talking about their efforts expanding into the South. So we have a local feel to the content of this event. And then as we shift to the investor side of the event, we've got three things. We first have a reverse pitch where investors will have 12 institutional investors get on stage and tell the audience what they look for, what their average check sizes are, to show the industry that, there is some capital here. It's maybe not abundant, but there's capital. So a reverse pitch, then an open ask me anything. Entrepreneurs can ask these VCs and angel investors whatever they want to know. It's an open, safe place. And then a pitch competition where we'll anoint a winner at the end. Then, we've got some other things sprinkled in. We've got some best practices workshops on our second day about how to exploit marketing given all the restrictions in the cannabis industry, and some real actionable how-to stuff. So we're excited. I think it's going to be a great conference.
Oh, I'm definitely looking forward to it. And I think the discussion that you just mentioned was topical. Of course, if you guys want to exploit marketing, you can always advertise on Elevate Your Grind. I think that should just be the number one thing taught on that on that workshop. But to expand on is there capital available? I'm really excited for this discussion, the reverse pitch, because that has been a very popular sentiment this year. I've talked about this and I've made jokes about it, but in all seriousness, Carson Humiston from Banks did a survey of the industry, and last year the industry raised about 1.6 billion in 2021 from venture capital. This past year, it's been under 300 million. And again, these are the numbers that I got from her. There has been kind of a drought in capital this year. And I don't know if because it's lack of opportunity, lack of access to capital or anything it is, but I think that's going to be a very interesting discussion to hear what the investors are saying, because a lot of these investors now, especially the historic groups that have been here, like Poseidon, like Entourage, like AFI and all the others, they've seen it. They've seen 5, 7, 10 years of cannabis companies coming across their plate. So are we just at a point where all the deals are starting to look the same, where there's no innovation, there's no competitive differentiation, or is it just that because so many people have already allocated money to the industry, there's just not that much more? Now, I've heard things go different ways. And again, you don't have to address the specifics here because I want people to get excited for this discussion, but any insight that you could offer that would give us a tease of the discussion. Like, I hear that Q1 in next year should actually be very, very active, because there are funds that believe they would find investments, didn't find great places to allocate to, and they need to put that money somewhere. And now obviously they won't do it stupidly, but they're going to be looking much, much harder for opportunities. So I'd love to hear your opinion and give us a little teaser of how you think that discussion's going to go, because that is definitely what I'm most excited for.
So I would say this: there's less capital in the space, but it's not that there's no capital in the space. A few things have happened during COVID from, let's say 19 through this year. One, major correction in the public markets.
Yep.
Public stocks went down 80%. I think they've recovered 20. Maybe they're hovering in between. And when that happens, potential limited partners to go into private equity funds say to themselves, and high net worth individuals, which are probably a bigger part of venture and private equity funds in cannabis, say to themselves, why don't I just take my capital and invest across the top 5 tier 1 MSOs or the top 10? And you know what? I'll get maybe a venture capital rate of return. Maybe I'll get 3 times my money in 4 years. And I get liquidity along the way. So I think we saw a drying up of LP capital going into funds. Now, as these public stocks start to go back up and be more rightly valued, and when that's 2 times your money over 5 years, there'll be more interest in private capital. So that's one dynamic. We got on top of that, the macro situation, pending slowdown and recession for, it's debatable how long we'll experience that. And all of that coming on top of a disappointment in, when the Dems took the House and the Senate in 2020 and Biden was elected, there was a lot of positive excitement about legalization happening quickly, and nothing happened. Biden proved pretty quickly not to be a real friend of the industry. And then that coming on top of it gave Vapegate. So a lot of those are what I would say is the root causes. But look, in New York, like I said, we put 15 institutional funds on stage to talk about what they're investing in. Average check sizes. You heard one say, I'm doing 1 to 3 million. The other say, I'm doing 500 to 750 in initial checks. So there is money. It's harder to come by, and it's not necessarily enough, but there is capital there. And, a lot of anticipation of, Safe Plus and Climb passing in the lame duck session, that will go a long way, at least for banks to provide debt to single state operators. I mean, there's debt funds that are focusing on the MSOs.
Yep.
It's not enough there, but they're getting funded. But for the next tier, the smaller businesses, the dual state operator, the $15 million cannabis company, SAFE should pave the way for money going into that. So I am optimistic Q1, Q2 that this is going to loosen up a little bit. But I do want to assure you and your audience, and again, we did 15 in New York, we're going to have 12 on stage in Miami, that you're going to hear investors that have capital and what they're looking for, and they're writing checks.
Oh, I hope so. And I believe you too, because, they're still going around. They're still looking at conferences. They're still taking meetings. And to me, I believe that they're just getting really smart with their money because they understand more so where the better opportunities are, the better business plans, and what a good management team looks like. It just comes from more and more years of experience doing it over and over again, which is why I'm so excited for this conversation. And I am hopeful because, and this is kind of where we go off the traditional interview and just kind of talk about my fear, and I think it's a fear of everybody in the industry, and imagine your group and the people who founded your group would share this, that there are a lot of people in this industry that have the scars on their backs from paving the way, whether it's the OGs all the way back in the day who were doing this in the black market, to some of the MSOs who have come out, who have invested millions upon millions of dollars into helping mainstream cannabis, and everyone in between. That my fear is that if they don't pass this legislature, if we don't have access to some of the traditional banking system, that everyone's going to start starving. You're going to see consolidation. They'll pass something later on, and then we see big corporations come in and scoop everybody up that never participated in this industry. And obviously, I know that's obviously the doomsday scenario, but I think that would, a lot of people would be very upset if that happened, especially the ones that took the chances to pave the way prior to being able to access everything and having to jump through hoops to create their business. And that's where I see a huge value in groups like yourself that are continuing to gather investors together and pair them with solid companies and offer that advice, and ensure people like, hey, if there's capital out there, we're going to help you find it, and we're going to bring it into the same room as you.
We all have scar tissue from the last 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It's not been easy for any of them. Some of the MSOs certainly could have grown at a faster rate had debt capital been more readily available for them. As far as sort of draconian consolidation from failing companies, there's going to be some of that. I think some of the states have put, we'll see what they do, but some of the states have put in controls. I mean, New York is, again, the program hasn't even launched, but real controls to prevent big canna or big pharma from coming in and owning disproportionate assets in their state. So I don't think it's going to go quite that way. Certainly there are going to be some distressed companies. I also don't think the game is over if Safe or Climb does not pass in the lame duck session. I think there's certainly room next year. Look, there's some 600-700 banks banking the industry now. So cash deposits aren't really the big issue. I mean, few of them are federal banks. Many of them are state chartered banks, but there are services that are enabling them and taking the risk out. PayQuick being one of them. That's, one of the companies we're pretty well aware of. So I don't I think SAFE is going to maybe pave the way for more capital to come in with less risk to those banks. But there are services there. And again, honestly, this industry has put up with so much, it's not going to crawl in a hole and die if it doesn't
No.
pass the lame duck. It'll pass in the future and it'll just limp along a little slower until it does. But this business will find a way to succeed.
No, and I think we're all going to go down swinging if it does come to that case, because this industry is super resilient, and a lot of the operators, this shit wasn't even legal when they were doing it to begin with, or it was gray. So I don't think a lack of access to capital is really going to stop them, and they'll do whatever's needed to continue to go. Let's get out of this doom and gloom little rut that I put us in, though. So you just witnessed firsthand the interactions in New York. You were telling us about it. What are people excited for new opportunities in the industry? Are we starting to see a lot more innovation? Are you starting to see people really focus on the pharmaceutical aspect or individualizing cannabinoids for different, for different treatments or ailments? Is there I'm sure there's a huge excitement for New York's legalization and what that's going to look like. I mean, I think they've done a great job with the decriminalization and realistically allowing you to smoke cannabis anywhere that you can smoke cigarettes in the city, essentially, if you will. Obviously, I'm generalizing, but I'd love to understand where a lot of the excitement for these investors are coming from as we re-engage in these live events and start convening again.
Yeah, just a quick side note. I walked from my office on 51st Street down 7th Avenue to Penn Station last night, and I could smell weed being smoked literally every second block.
Mm-hmm.
But I also saw 3 illegal weed trucks, which I'm sure you heard are all over New York, with not a lot of enforcement. And although if you read the papers, they are starting to get busted. There's been a few illegal dispensaries where law enforcement is now starting to come down on. That has to happen, right? Because people are investing money to be in the industry, and New York's going out of its way to be helpful to the legacy market and get them on the legal side, probably better than most states. Yeah. But anyway, to answer your question, so New York was really all about tri-state area aspirational operators and kind of curious to come to an event in one place, hear what's going on from a regulatory standpoint. We had Crystal Peoples-Stokes and Senate Majority Leader Crystal Peoples-Stokes from the New York State Assembly, and we had Liz Kruger, Senator Kruger. They were both the co-sponsors of the MRTA bill in New York on stage, talking about their idea for this and how they got the deal done. So they wanted to understand the regulatory environment, who the people were, and what's happening in New York. So New York had its unique draw as sort of an up and coming area or region, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey. And so that, I think, was a big part of what was interesting for people. And we had a lot of newbies come that wanted to really learn about the industry, and new investors that hadn't invested in cannabis, that were from real estate or fashion, that said, look, now it's time because it's in my state. And I think some people also just wanted to learn the language around financing, like what's pre-seed, what's seed, what's growth capital, how do I think about myself? I'm a licensed aspirant. I don't have a license yet. I've got one. Now I've got the license and I've got my real estate. How do investors view me? It was very educational for a lot of younger companies to understand, sort of the process of raising money.
See, that's something that really never occurred to me anymore, especially when you have such a concentration of private wealth and private investors in Manhattan and in New York and the surrounding areas, New Jersey, etc., that they didn't feel a connection to it because they didn't see the industry. It wasn't around them. It was out west in California and Oregon and Washington and Colorado and Nevada. And maybe when they did some traveling, they'd see a dispensary or anything else, but they truly didn't understand the value of the industry and how many people around them participate. Because for the longest time, and I used to walk in the family office circles, you didn't talk about smoking weed. Most of them did. In private, they didn't discuss it. And trust me, I was really good at sniffing those folks out. It was a big part of my career and what brought me to where I am now. But now that they're seeing it firsthand, and they're actually seeing the unorganized gray side of it in the city. Like, I don't know if you saw Kyle Kazan from Glasshouse Farms, the video that he posted going into a New York dispensary and seeing his actual Glasshouse Farms flower on the shelves, and you see a ton of actual California products with California metric tags on the shelves, which is crazy. But to be exposed to that and see what these brands can do from a demand standpoint, that's crazy. I never thought that that's what truly would start pulling new investors into the space.
Yeah, I'd say you're right. I think also it wasn't in their face, but they weren't sure that this whole adult rec was legitimized because it was largely a West Coast notion.
Yeah.
I think the emergence and success in the Midwest, in Illinois and Michigan, gave a lot of comfort. And then when it passed in New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut, I think now not only was it in their face, but it was legitimized. It's not going away. The feds aren't going to come in and start to enforce federal law on state sanctioned businesses. So I think that was a lot of it. The single family offices and the high net worth individuals really were, believe it or not, the first investors that kind of could take this risk, investing off their own balance sheets and not worrying about investment committees. They were really the ones that took the first. Honestly, the same thing happened in tech 30 years ago. Once they do that, then they pick managers who can do it better than them.
Yeah.
But I think that's right. I think that's happened. It's in their face and it's more legitimized.
That's awesome. And well, I know we're both on a time limit here, and I think we can sit down and have more of this conversation at the event. I'll be dressed a little bit nicer than I am today.
Come in a t-shirt.
All right. By all means, I will. Rob, I hope you heard that. I'm coming in a t-shirt. Jeff, is there anything else that we haven't talked about for next week that we want to tell everybody before we get out of here?
Look, come to the event. You want to meet people, listen to the content. It'll be good for you, whether you just want to catch up on what's happened or you're new to the industry and you kind of want to learn what it's all about. And here's one thing that I would say. If you come, please come. Go out of your way, certainly, to make at least 2 friends at the conference, 2 people that you have a real strong connection with, that you can follow up and become part of a new emerging network for you in cannabis. I think that would be great. One last thing maybe I would also put in, because I didn't say it, we are also having one panel on Friday about psychedelics. A lot of our investors are expressing an interest in psychedelics. It's very different than cannabis for a lot of reasons.
Oh, the panelists are not going to be on psychedelics. I thought that's what you were doing. Never mind.
Well, we have one panel about psychedelics. Though they will not be on, well, they might be on psychedelics. We'll see, but I don't know. That's up to them, of course. But anyway, we're going to expose some content around that space as well. It's going to be a great event. We're really excited. And, we hope that as many of your listeners that want to join, come and join.
Absolutely. I hope everybody chooses to join. They are amazing events. Where can they get tickets? Is it arcview.com or what's the website?
Go to Arcview, arcviewgroup.com. Go to events, click on it. The Miami event will come up and you'll see the right place to push the right button.
Very cool. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. And I definitely look forward to seeing you next week. Anything else before we go?
That's it, Todd. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, Jeff, thank you so much. And thank you to everybody at home. As Jeff mentioned, if you want to check out the event, it'll be next week at the Loews Coral Gables. Go to arcviewgroup.com. Of course, if you missed any part of this interview or you want to check out any of our interviews, you can find those on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, wherever you find your podcast. You can find the videos at youtube.com/@thecannabis.lab. And if you are interested in finding out more about Cannabis Lab, find us at joinclab.com.